morning. Good morning. My name is Ann Arellano, and I serve as the Vice President Administration on the DuPage UU Church Board of Trustees. We want to welcome everyone this morning to our open and inclusive virtual community. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold that there are many spiritual paths to truth and meaning, and pledge to support one another as we explore these paths. We are so glad you were able to find us and join us for our live stream service this morning. Please check the church website at dupageuchurch.org for updates. If you search under DuPage UU Church on Facebook, you will also find a number of ways to be in community with us as well. This Sunday, join us after service for Zoom Coffee Hour. Zoom gives us a way to create small groups at random. This way, you might be grouped with someone you haven't met yet and get to make a new friend. The number of four-person groups depends on how many people attend. We hope to see you there. The Zoom link can be found on the Members tab of our website and in the weekly church email. Another announcement, Auction 2020 Star Trek. Have you boldly gone where no one has gone before for Auction 2020? Bought your ticket, $5. Donated items? Viewed the calendar of parties and events? At dupageuchurch.org/auction2020, you'll find information leading to auction tickets, donations, suggested offerings, and how to create a profile for viewing and bidding on auction items. There will be access to bid Friday, November 6th through noon on Sunday, November 8th, and a cool Zoom party in the middle on Saturday, November 7th. Look for the link to Auction 2020 information under quick links on the church website homepage, in emails coming your way, and in the October newsletter. Help DuPage UU Church live long and prosper while offering and purchasing great stuff. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome. So if you're sitting at home, you may have noticed that we had a little bit of technical difficulty this morning. We apologize for that. We have an excellent tech team who will figure out what's been going on with YouTube and see if that won't happen again. I have to say that since we went all virtual, I think it's been almost 6 months. I'm really just amazed that we haven't had more technical difficulties. So we're good. I think we're good. One more announcement. The search committee asks that we convey their gratitude to all the members and friends who filled out the congregational survey. That'll be very helpful to them in their work. And if you want to go deeper and have discussions with the search committee, they will be hosting some cottage meetings real soon. So you'll be able to learn about that in our weekly email and Facebook page and website and so on. So please watch for that. Come, let us listen with new ears. Do you hear it? That voice so familiar yet still far. Less a longing and more a knowing. A whisper of something inside that seems to have known us longer than we've known it. Come, let us listen together. Blessed be. Our chalice lighting this morning is from Ryan Cobb-Larson.
We light our chalice this morning for the words and deeds of prosthetic people, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love.
Our opening hymn is Find a Stillness. It is number 352 in the gray hymnal.
Please join me in saying our spoken affirmation, followed by the sung affirmation of this congregation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
It is time to gather. Our theme this month is deep listening, and today we are listening to Black, Indigenous, and people of color voices. As we work towards dismantling racism in our society, we need to look back in our history and see what lessons can be learned. So here's a true story written by a friend and religious educator, Jessica York, about a time in UU history when deep listening changed a decision that was racist and harmful to Black, Indigenous people of color. This story is about a time when a group of Unitarian Universalists had to make a difficult decision together and needed to listen to each other. Unitarian Universalism is a living faith. We think that people should be free to believe what they must believe, the truth of their life experiences, instead of professing a belief in what we are told to believe. This is what we mean when we say ours is a creedless religion. Being a living faith means that any one of us can change what we believe if we experience a deeper truth that contradicts our previous beliefs. But in order to change, you have to be open to new thoughts, new ideas, and new experiences. You have to have your ears open to hear the experiences of the people with whom you are in community. There is a saying that people were created with 2 ears and 1 mouth because we should listen twice as much as we speak. When we come together in community, we have the opportunity to listen to each other and gain a perspective greater than what we would have alone. Sometimes we listen with our ears, and when you're part of a beloved community, you listen not only with your ears, but also with your heart. A listening heart has the power to help us be better people. So in 1948, most congregations and houses of worship in the United States were segregated or separated by the colors of the members' skin. Some were segregated by law, others by custom, or by the lack of actively trying to welcome and include all people. And the First Unitarian Society of Chicago was one of these congregations. This is the church that is in Hyde Park. Although the church was located in a neighborhood with many African Americans, only whites could join, according to the written bylaws or rules of the church, and according to custom. The day came that many members began to believe they needed to take action against racism if they really wanted to live their values and principles. And the minister, the Reverend Leslie Pennington, was ready for this day and ready to take action. So was James Luther Adams. James Luther Adams was a famous liberal theologian and social ethicist, a person who studies religion, beliefs, and values. Dr. Adams taught at the Meadville Lombard Theological School, which was right across the street from the First Unitarian Society of Chicago. And he was a member of the congregation's board of directors. He was a leader of the congregation. And along with some others, Reverend Pennington and James Luther Adams proposed a change in the church's bylaws to desegregate or unseparate the church and welcome people whatever the color of their skin. They wanted to include, not exclude, and they saw this as a way to put their love into action. When the congregation's board of directors considered the desegregation proposal, most of them supported it. However, one member of the board objected. Your new program is making desegregation into a creed, he said. You are asking everyone in our church to say they believe desegregating or inviting, even recruiting people of color to attend church here is a good way to tackle racism. What if some members don't believe this? So desegregation was a very controversial topic, and in 1948, anything about skin color and racism was controversial. Some people, even some who supported African Americans in demanding their civil liberties, believed in a separate but equal policy which kept people apart based on skin color. Respectful debate ensued at the First Unitarian Society of Chicago. Both sides felt in their hearts that their belief was right. Perhaps they were so busy trying to be heard, they forgot to listen. And so they kept on talking. And the debate went on in the board of directors meeting until the early hours of the morning, and everyone was exhausted and frustrated. Finally, James Luther Adams remembered that we should be listening twice as much as talking, and he asked the person who had voiced the strongest objection, "What do you say is the purpose of this church?" Suddenly, everyone was listening. Everyone wanted to hear the answer to this crucial question. Probably the person who objected was listening especially hard to his own heart, as well as to the words he had heard from the other board members through the long discussion. The board member who opposed opening the church to people of color finally replied, "Okay, Jim, the purpose of this church is to get hold of people like me and change them." So the First Unitarian Society of Chicago successfully desegregated. There are things that you know, and there are things that I know. And when we are together and listening to each other with ears and hearts, we know more.
The reading today appeared in The Spirit That Moves, 2019, edited by the Reverend Barbara Child. It is by the Reverend Dr. Michelle Walsh, who is a scholar and Unitarian Universalist minister in Boston, Massachusetts. Rise up and hold back. I have been involved with racial and economic justice education and action since my young adulthood, primarily in urban ministry and social work. Here is the story of something that happened not long ago when I was teaching a racial justice course at Boston University's School of Social Work. 1/3 of my students were people of color, and 2/3 were white. We were very aware of things happening beyond the classroom, particularly the murders of young black men, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, and 12-year-old Tamir Rice. The streets were ringing with cries for justice, and the Black Lives Matter movement began to take the public stage. It is not atypical in any class for some to feel more comfortable speaking up and for some to sit listening. Often my white students preferred to just listen. Usually I have the students agree at the beginning to a practice of stepping up and stepping back. This language developed during Occupy Boston. Since that time, the activist community has come to recognize the value of expanding this metaphor to be more inclusive of ability, such as rise up. So in other words, students who are more comfortable speaking up are asked to practice holding back and listening to create the space for others who need time to practice speaking up. Well, that didn't exactly work for this particular class. A young, highly engaged African American man expressed his profound frustration, that is, compounded his frustration to be asked to step back. "No," he said, slamming his hand on the desk. "No, everyone needs to step up. The practice should be step up, not step back." He clearly thought this was particularly important for the young white students for whom it was easier and more comfortable to sit and listen than to do the hard and less familiar work of emotional risk and engagement. With challenge and support, gradually everyone began to risk entering this brave space together. The times they are a-changin', as Bob Dylan taught us in the 1960s. What worked before may not work now. New paths, new practices are called for on the macro level of our nation and on the micro level of our own congregational practices as well. So how will you in your congregation rise up in this process? The times are calling us to attend together now to the most serious concerns of our shared lives. Here ends the reading.
We take time in our services to lift up the joys and sorrows in our community. And since we've been broadcasting, we have not been saying them aloud. I'm also mindful that we are coming up on Columbus Day, which many others have begun to think of as Indigenous Peoples Day, to lift up the people who lost land and lives in the process of colonization. I'm also aware of, and we'll be speaking today about the Black Lives Matter movement and all those folks who are, again, trying to keep each other alive and to fight oppression. There are so many sorrows out there, and it is for those sorrows that I light our candle today. I invite you to join voices in song for our meditative hymn, which is Voice Still and Small. Our theme this month is deep listening. Does it seem like no one is listening to anyone else these days? Like everyone is talking over everyone else, drowning each other out? illogical statements and preposterous claims that have taken over the public discourse and found its way to personal conversations, such as with a friend or family member who has differing views from one's own. You've likely heard of me speak of this before in terms of some members of my own family who are ardent supporters of Trump and who do not see the illogical or preposterous nature of the nonsense they repeat. It makes me mindful of Diogenes. In a history about philosophers, Diogenes Laertius quoted this aphorism. He said, "We have 2 ears and 1 tongue so that we would listen more and talk less." He attributed this saying to Zeno, the founder of the Stoic school of philosophy, as something that he had said to another person who was speaking nonsense. Oh, to be able to say this to some people I know. You know what I mean? Do you know who I wish would listen more and talk less? Well, yes, him, but actually, I meant people more broadly. We have such a long history in the U.S. A long history of treating people of color so poorly, from slavery to emancipation, from Reconstruction to Jim Crow, second-class citizenship to the civil rights movement, to today and Black Lives Matter. In all this, the white, affluent guardians of the status quo have spoken so loudly and nonstop that it has been difficult for people of color to even speak and say what it is they need to feel like they are truly equal and safe in our society. It is striking to review the civil rights movement of the 1960s and compare this to the tragic events which has led to the emergence of the BLM movement in more recent years. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and all those who marched alongside of him might ask how it is that we've come so far, yet have not achieved, but most certainly have not achieved equity and equality in society. I'd like to share some of what MLK was working on back then and reflect on how that work continues today. Dr. King spoke out against racial inequality in society. He spoke against white supremacy and the KKK. He pointed out inequities in housing, employment, and justice when comparing how black and white people are treated. And he spoke about a dream he had for his children. I look at all those things that Dr. King and so many others worked for, and I realize that for all the progress that has been made, it has not been enough. And in fact, in some instances, one might argue that society has actually regressed. We often hear quotes from the "I have a dream" speech, which are beautiful and aspirational, while also challenging society to make a change. Less often, we hear the words of Dr. King when he was beset by frustration and exasperation. I imagine if he were to see the world as it is today, still with many of the same issues he spoke against, he would be frustrated. I'm thinking of his letter from Birmingham jail, particularly as it still points to what we are seeing in society today. Dr. King and others involved with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference were called to Birmingham, Alabama in 1963 to peacefully and nonviolently demonstrate for the end of racial segregation in society and institutional racism. In this era and region, institutions, services, businesses, and even doorways were labeled whites only, or less often labeled for colored people. These were cafes, water fountains, public restrooms, movie theaters, all kinds of private businesses and schools, churches, and even whole neighborhoods. Some people had had enough, and they planned a demonstration to pressure the local government to make changes in law for the just treatment of all people. But as you may already know, many involved in the demonstration were arrested because they did not have a parade permit. A permit which, of course, would never have been issued to an organization deemed black or sympathizers of the same. so they demonstrated without a permit. While he was sitting in a jail cell, someone brought Dr. King a newspaper that contained an open letter written by 8 white religious leaders. It's a bit horrifying to me to realize that these would have been my colleagues and peers had I been in the ministry in that place and time. These pastors, like others in other cities and throughout the South during the Civil Rights era, wrote that they wished outsiders would not come to their city stirring up trouble, and made the prediction that justice and equality would come when it's time, and that no one really needed to protest about it. Just let time take its supposedly natural course. Of course, this was a time in which elected leaders in Alabama were all white. In fact, in some counties in Alabama in the early 60s, there were no black registered voters, even if they were the majority of the residents of said counties. It was into this context that Dr. King, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference members, and so many others marched into. At this demonstration, like so many others, and as he wrote in his letter from jail, he reminded us that rights have never been granted to an oppressed class without them demanding it. That change did not come to society without many people working to make it change. That freedom was won through action, not inaction, by speaking up, not staying silent. His letter was largely aimed at white moderates, including elected and religious leaders all across the country, and not just the 8 that wrote the letter in the newspaper. Dr. King said to all who would listen, and I quote, "I must confess that over the last few years I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that our great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, 'I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action,' who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is more bewildering than outright rejection," Dr. King said. It feels as if he is speaking today. I could well have imagined those words at a prayer vigil in so many cities, or at our southern border, or perhaps spoken through a megaphone outside the White House right now. Why not? The message he shared seems timeless, regrettably in part because some things just have not changed, even if we thought they had. Or they did change for the better for a while. But now it feels to some of us like our society is backsliding, and we wish that to stop. But if we want to do something about it, I think we need to join hands with a great many other people. I say that metaphorically and realizing we're in COVID. But to metaphorically join hands with a great many other people. We will not solve the problems of the world if we never look beyond our own provincial concerns or local problems. I will continue with this in a few moments.
The recipient of our offertory today is the Unitarian Universalist Action Network of Illinois. We hope that you can give generously. Using our online donation portal, you can select the recipient so we know where to direct your money. Here is a video about their work in the community.
Hi, Kay Mooney here with the Unitarian Universalist Advocacy Network of Illinois. UUANI powers the social justice work of congregations. We provide people across Illinois with advocacy and legislative leadership to effectively build community and power to promote justice and a healthy planet. We bring social justice into the heart of the spiritual life of congregations and develop ways for church communities to live our UU principles. We help bridge communities and congregations and align spirituality with tangible actions to affect change. Since 2013, we have worked to ensure that those pieces of legislation that are near and dear to you, those places where you know you want to see change within the world, are at your fingertips. We've worked with organizations like Faith in Place and ICER, the Illinois Coalition of Immigrant and Refugee Rights, to make sure that we know about the legislation that's going into the Illinois Legislative House and Senate, and so that you can act on that legislation as you wish, and so that you can get down to Springfield when it's possible to be able to talk to your legislators and ensure that they know how you feel about the bills that they are working on. This year, one of the more important things that we have worked on is to help congregations get out the vote. Voting this year is so important, and what's most important about it to us is that people vote not out of a sense of hate or a sense of fear, but out of a sense of love. What is it that draws us forward into the world and demands that we act as our principles encourage us to? How do we live so that compassion that we feel enables us to work for equity and justice? This year, with 400 other volunteers around the state in congregations just like yours, we have been able to write 8 letters to the editor that got published. We got 448 people registered to vote. We've contacted over 1,000 people in text and phone banks. We've hosted over 1,350 people at 100 different events. We've posted to social media over 3,600 times. We've sent over 25,000 postcards and letters, and that number is still growing. We actually organized or helped to organize the delivery of 500,000 postcards around the country with postcards to swing states. We are out there in the streets with signs reminding people what matters. Vote. You matter. You are essential. We are in our homes with pens, writing people to make sure that they know the same. Our goal at UUANI is to help you advocate for substantive change in those areas that you care about. We thank you for your support, and we thank you that you will help us to keep this dream of an equitable world built on compassion that demands justice with us. I hope that you will give what you can. Whatever amount it is, consider it a blessing to us. Thank you for your support, and thank you for this time. As President Obama reminded us in his Nobel acceptance speech, for all the cruelty and hardship in our world, we are not prisoners of fate. Our actions matter and will bend history in the direction of justice. Bend with me, folks. Bend that arc of history. Thank you for your support.
Thank you, Vera. Similar to our earlier quote from Diogenes, another philosopher, Epictetus, is believed to have said, "Nature hath given men one tongue but two ears, that we may hear from others twice as much as we speak." I shared a short excerpt from Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail speaking about the white moderates who told black people to bide their time. To me, that implies there was some sort of dialogue happening, even if the purpose of the dialogue was to delay progress and discourage civil actions. But it does not feel to me like there is much dialogue today. Too often I hear of protests and counter-protests and no communication or even the opportunity and effort to communicate between opposing parties. A polarizing polemic has been created to denigrate Black Lives Matter, prioritizing the wounded egos of police everywhere over the lives of people taken by a few bad cops who should be in prison. Let me go off on a tangent for a second. I used the word denigrate as to be taken as to take something positive and turn it into a pejorative or negative thing, such as, say, Black Lives Matter, and turning that into some sort of attack on white policemen. Going to a meta level, even the word to make something seem bad is itself a pejorative. The root of denigrate is negrer, black. Built into our language is the concept that to make something seem bad, just imply it is connected to black people. Racism is bone deep in Western culture, and it is deeply embedded into the very DNA of America. How then do we affect change? I don't have any easy answers to questions that are so embedded in the fabric of our nation, our culture, our language, that we cannot even speak without othering someone different than ourselves in a way that puts them down and keeps them down. Even so, I'm reminded of other words found in MLK's letter from Birmingham jail. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. So, returning to the point of all this, beyond the injustice which we can all see if we look, and that is the idea of deep listening. I think we all agree we want to live in a just and equitable world. And I suggest that listening is a critical component in a process to make that happen. It seems so elementary that one of our young people in the YRE program could have preached this sermon. We need to listen to each other. And when someone is hurting, when there are others who are crying out to be heard, we should listen. Realizing that you who are listening to me right now are people who chose to align yourselves with a social justice denomination like Unitarian Universalism. And so I realize you know all this. However, I'm saying this to remind myself and you and everyone that it is important that we keep lifting up this message of deep listening and reminding others of this need. Our society will not heal itself of its ills if we cannot hear each other. You know, I think this was much like an experience this congregation had last year. Before I came, there had been some trauma and disagreement in the congregation. Maybe there were some folks who were not yet able to talk with or listen to others. Eventually, the transition team and I hosted some community gatherings, the purpose of which was simply to speak what was on the hearts and minds of members, and for others among us to simply listen. We did these 5 or 6 different times. Sometimes with so many people present, we had to split up in smaller groups, and we listened to each other. And many people afterwards said it had been a healing experience. Well, it would be impossible to create such an experience on a national level, I think, but we must do something. Until we start listening to each other, most especially for those with privilege, to listen to those who are oppressed in our society, until then, our society will continue to chafe and burn and irritate us all. It is time to listen. And maybe our example of listening to others with less privilege will help some of our own to realize they can listen too. One does not lose their privilege, whether that be white privilege, male privilege, or class privilege, by taking time to listen. We lose nothing, and yet we give another precious gift when we stop to listen, to actually hear and take on what someone else is sharing of their life and their experience. It is for this I pray. May it ever be so, and blessed be you all. Our closing hymn is Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire. It's 34 in the gray hymnal, and the words will be on your screen. As we leave this space, may the bonds we feel remain. May the words of this day continue to guide and steady us as we make our way. May the silence we held for each other keep us tethered to that place of calm, to that opening in our hearts that allows the grace of the world to continually flow in and speak. May it ever be so, and blessed be you all. Those words were by my colleague, the Reverend Scott Taylor. Blessed be, and go in peace.